Welcome to TCM Classics. Good morning. Today we're going to be going over the 4 examinations from the web that has no weaver, i.e. signs and symptoms, and Aristotle and Lao Tzu revisited. So the first 5 chapters, and we made it halfway almost. We're almost, well, not quite, but almost halfway through the web that has no weaver. So if you refer to all my previous videos, you'll see that we have covered the theory of yin and yang, all the different theory that you need before you can get into not inquiry, but assessment, right? So we have olfaction, observation, we have being able to see the person with the tongue diagnosis, smell the person, touch the person with palpation, taking the pulse, and obviously all of these will either confirm will help confirm our diagnosis. So we want to already kind of have an idea of the diagnosis based off of our theory, and then we're kind of confirming whether or not that is correct with the tongue and pulse. And so we're going to start off with the 4 examinations, but then also we're going to get into tongue diagnosis as well in the next video. So this is just pulse diagnosis, which is one of the most difficult parts of Chinese medicine because it requires an extensive amount of practice. And unfortunately, you don't, unless you're just sitting there taking your friend's pulse every day and taking your own pulse every day, and you're obsessed with pulse diagnosis, it's going to be hard to really have any experience with it until you actually get into clinic and start feeling pulses. So it's a good idea to just take your own pulse, take somebody's pulse, feel the pulse, check, we have the 9 on each side, and that's just think about it, the more tongues you've seen, the more pulses you've felt, the more you're going to be able to differentiate diagnoses and symptomology and be able to treat the person effectively. And we will get into the details, but obviously how we confirm a diagnosis we have built based off of inquiry and assessing signs and symptoms, as well as the patient's chief complaint and secondary complaint. They basically, at that point, once we have our diagnosis, we're looking at the tongue to make sure that, if we are saying the pattern of disharmony is interior, we can tell by the tongue if it's interior or not. We can, and we can tell by the pulse how deep the pathogen is, right? So if the pulse is only felt on a superficial level, but we can't feel it at a deep level, then obviously it's on the exterior, right? But we know that a lot of the time, the pulse and the tongue will sort of be our that I know that it's for sure interior because the tongue coating is removed, right? The tongue coating is gone and it's been used up by the heat. So we have the pathogen is interior. The location of the pathogen is determined by the tongue and the pulse. And it's so important because you actually aren't really, you might as well just not treat the patient at all if you're not going to check the tongue and pulse, right? Because you can't just say, base your diet, you go into a Western doctor and you're not going to go in and be like, hey, this is my problem, and then they treat you. They're going to obviously do a checkup on you as well, and that's our form of that. So the first 5 chapters discuss the vocabulary and ideas behind the Chinese weaving of patterns. Now the theories of fundamental textures, organs, meridians, and pernicious influences must become concrete. How do these ideas work when they are applied to a specific patient? How do they enable a physician to perceive a pattern of disharmony? What does the doctor look for, and how are the more important clues distinguished from the less important? How does the doctor begin to deal with all the signs and symptoms a patient presents? In this chapter, we will follow the procedure a novice physician uses with the patient. We will see the way Chinese physicians examine. Oh, and I wanted to just add before I forget too, that based off of what I was previously saying, obviously when you're new, right? And so you go in, you have your 10 questions memorized, and you go through, you cover all your 10 questions with your patient, you look at their case study, you're like muling through this process. And then you go talk to your your clinic supervisor, you go over all the signs and symptoms, they ask you what the diagnosis is, and then they tell you if you're wrong or right, and ask you what points you want to do, hopefully, and then they realistically, like a good advanced Chinese medicine doctor that you would like go see in China or whatever, he's going to have his acupuncturist, his nurse do all that assessment, and then he just walks in, doesn't say a word. He saw you already in the patient waiting room. He already knows your diagnosis based off just being able to glance at you for a second from the waiting room. So what he does is he walks in with a big smile on his face full of Tao, and he just checks your pulse, looks at your tongue, smiles at you, nods his head, and walks away. And that right there is a Chinese medicine doctor. The doctor is the one who takes the tongue and the pulse to confirm the diagnosis. They go and write the herbal prescription. The nurse in China is the acupuncturist. And I just want to make that very clear that like when you're studying in North America, in Canada, in the US to be a registered acupuncturist, you are considered basically a nurse in China, like an acupuncture nurse. You know what I mean? You're not considered a doctor or even close to that, right? The real goods of this medicine comes from experience and taking the boat out to sea and working with your patients. But at the same time, this is my theory, I don't believe any person can ever be a good doctor if they have not done the work on themselves first. So I do believe that you can have all the knowledge in the world and be a genius and go out there and treat people and do well at it. But if you haven't truly understood Chinese medicine and felt it in your core and truly healed yourself, honestly, really treated dug deep and used the medicine within yourself, it doesn't really matter how good of a doctor you are until you've done that. I don't believe you're really capable of meeting people where they're at on a real level. How can you? You know what I mean? You haven't been through it. You haven't looked at it. So there's that. And I think that's, in China, maybe it's a lot more talked about, but I think in the West, I don't think it's talked about enough. That, you can say the same thing about the Western medicine, right? Western doctors that, put on the white coat, do all the schooling, and then they go into their field. But have they healed their relationship? Did they have a healthy relationship with their family? Have they healed their relationships? Have they, worked on themselves? Have they overcome their demons, their defects of character? Because I don't want somebody treating me that hasn't even helped themselves first, which you can apply that to Canada, right? As a country, wow, I don't try to help everyone until you first helped yourself. Get out of your debt, figure out how to help, what you have here first before you try to help more and more and more people. That's a bad doctor. That's a bad country. So how do we, or they, enable a physician to perceive a pattern of disharmony? What does the doctor look for? And how are the more important clues distinguished from the less important? How does the doctor begin to deal with all the signs and symptoms a patient presents? So in this chapter, we'll follow a procedure that I already said this. So we'll see the way Chinese physicians examine patients, what they look for, how they judge the significance of what they see, how they interpret the signs and symptoms. These pieces, the stones, mountains, mist, and pebbles of the landscape, can indulge or include a wide range of data, physical frame, style of movement, pain, moods, pulse, and many other signs. So that's real physics right there. Talking about the body is we're just woo, 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 we're gonna, there's so many ways of assessing a person. I mean, this is why you have to step out of doctor role when you go into your personal life, because if you just carry that with you everywhere you go, you're going to be in a constant state of diagnosis. Everyone you meet, you're like, and it's not to say that maybe you don't notice those things, but yeah, I mean, as you study and memorize all the signs and symptoms, you'll go out into the world and be able to see things, see pathologies. But are you diagnosing them? No, you're just observing. In this chapter, we will follow the procedure. I said that 3 times. So when these bits and pieces of information are put together, they create an image of disharmony. So the very process of examining the pieces of a pattern poses a problem. What do we make of a piece in a system that says that only the whole can determine the meaning of the piece? Before we go on to the examinations, therefore, we should look again at the philosophy that informs Chinese medicine so that our customary Western point of view will not interfere with our understanding. As has been said, Chinese philosophy and medicine are based on the Taoist consciousness and on the yin and yang theory, which imply a world view very different from that of the West. The Chinese could never produce Aristotelian and would be hard-pressed to accept Aristotle's famous law of contradiction. There is a principle in things about which we cannot be deceived, but must always, on the contrary, recognize the truth, viz., that the same thing cannot at one and the same time be and not be, or admit any other similar pair of opposites. This principle that A cannot be not A because of the cornerstone of all Western logic, yet little trace of it can be found in either Taoist thought or Chinese medical writings. A very different spirit informs the Chinese view of knowledge of being. Lao Tzu, the earliest Taoist sage, formulated this understanding of the nature of reality. To be bent is to become straight. We all know this saying. To be empty is to be full. To be worn is to be out is to be renewed. To have little is to possess. Chuang-Tzu, the Taoist philosopher, says, when there is life, there is death, and when there is death, there is life. When there is possibility, there is impossibility, and when there is impossibility, there is possibility. Because of the right, there is wrong. Because of the wrong, there is right. The this is also the that. The that is also the this. Is there really a distinction between this and that? When this and that have no opposites, there is the very axis of Tao. Change and transformation are the only constants for the Chinese. Things A and not A, this and that, can simultaneously be and not be. Yin and yang produce each other, imply each other, and finally are each other. And you can refer to my video on yin and yang theory for the details on that, the 4 aspects and how, mutual opposition and all that. There was at least one pre-Socratic Western philosopher, Heraclitus, who seemed to have developed a view of the universe compatible to that of Taoists. The fragments of his writing that have come down to us set forth his ideas. The attunement of the world is the opposite of tensions, is of opposite tensions, as is that of the harp and the bow. The road up and the road down is one and the same. The beginning and end are common. Which is at variance with itself agrees with itself. Cold things become warm. Warmth cools, moisture dries, the parched get wet. It scatters and gathers, it comes and goes. The Heraclitean notion of primitive flux is very close to that of the Tao, but Heraclitus represents only one skein of Western thought. The dominant ideas were those of Aristotle and his followers, for whom the primary consideration was how things emerged from such flux and achieve distinct existence. The flux had to be differentiated, carved into distinct categories, therefore, before there could be a reality as Aristotle conceived it. The Aristotelian emphasis on form derives from this concern. The Chinese, however, never thought of the Tao or flux as a various undertow from which things must fight free and distinguish themselves. To them, the flux is a vast harmony that embraces all things. They do not ask of an entity how well it measures up to the pure form prescribed for it. but rather what is its relationship to other entities. So I'm going to say that again. They do not ask of an entity how well it measures up to the pure form prescribed for it, but rather what its relationship to other entities. It is not important. So we talk about that in the previous video, right? Where I talk a lot about things in relation to each other, not being able to define unless they are in comparison to something else. It is not important or even necessary that, like the organs in relation to each other, it is not important or even necessary that every entity attain pure form, but it is important that every entity have a place in the overarching pattern of existence. In the 19th century, Hegel finally confronted and denied Aristotle's law of contradiction and developed the theory that has come to be known as Hegelian dialectics. For Hegel, the intricacies of human relationship override an Aristotelian concern that A not be confused with not A. A can, in fact, be other than A, depending on its place in an overall schema. These ideas are so similar to those of the Chinese philosophy that Hegelian and Chinese thought have often been compared. But Chinese and Taoist philosophy are not exactly the same as Hegelian dialectics. The Chinese, for example, never elaborate their intuition of the dialectical process in a philosophy of reason, as Hegel did. They went no further than to make simple refinements in yin and yang theory. They never tried to tame the elusive and changeable qualities of Tao. The word Tao, although sometimes translated as the way, cannot really be translated into satisfactory English. And even its meaning in Chinese frustrates the attempt to pin it down. Which again, like when I was talking in the last video about how Sanjiao is like the lymphatic system and how we don't really necessarily want to, that's kind of something we really want to try not to do as a student and practitioner of Chinese medicine, to go, oh, well, that's this in Western medicine. Because you can't, not everything is translatable. Anybody who has ever learned a second language knows that. And it's the same with the medicine. So, like, it's almost better to just don't translate Tao. Don't translate it at all. Just, it's Tao. You know what I mean? That's my theory. That's my opinion. Learn what Tao is. Don't try to compare it to something that you already know, because it's not comparable. Just learn what it is. Be fascinated of it. And if anybody ever tells you that they're a Taoist philosopher or a Taoist practitioner, just laugh to yourself and walk away, because, or, you know, you don't have to be mean, but just don't believe them, because anybody who truly understands Tao, all they would ever really say to you is that they're a great lover of the Tao and they're a great fan of the Tao and that they follow it or try to as best they can. The Chinese emphasis on interconnectedness and change, so I wanted to add also that the Tao as the ultimate reality can be apprehended in medicine, for instance, but that apprehension has to take place within the context of flux, interconnectedness, and dynamism. The Tao comes to stand for something that does not deny reason, but always manages to remain just outside of its grasp. The Chinese emphasis on interconnectedness and change takes on a very specific character in the context of medicine. When the young Chinese physician examines a patient, he or she plans to look at many, many signs and symptoms and to make them a diagnosis, to see in them a pattern. Each sign means nothing by itself and acquires meaning only in its relationship to the patient's other signs, right? So if somebody's like, you know, like say somebody just ran a marathon, right? And then they come into the clinic for a treatment and they're like, like they just like that. It's just because they're like out of breath and panting, we're not dying. We have to basically understand like what just happened. Oh, you just ran a marathon. You take things within their context, right? What it means in one context is not necessarily what it means in another, right? So if somebody's like been scraping their tongue like crazy and then they like don't have any tongue coating, it doesn't necessarily mean that the tongue coating has been dried up. And so we have to learn as Chinese medicine practitioners how to like obviously meet the patient where they're at, but ask enough questions, be able to know, like, and be able to see, like, oh, like, I can see if somebody scraped their tongue, and then what's really, to be able to see through that regardless of what's really going on. But then also asking your patient, hey, you know what, do you mind not scraping your tongue for 2 days before you come see me, or 3 days before you come see me, and then we can get a better idea of what's going on the tongue coating. And we can say the same thing with facial diagnosis, right? Or just diagnosis in general. If somebody's wearing makeup, it's hard to tell, like, if their face is red or not, right? If there's a red tip of the nose, or if there's dark, like a green tinge to their skin, or dark circles under their eyes. So obviously being able to kind of see through that mask, or even eventually having them come in without makeup one day, all that stuff, right? If they're comfortable with that. Obviously, we're not going to, like, demand them to not wear makeup. That's mean. So, where am I? When statements are made in this chapter, therefore, they are always modified by the word usually. This is because, based off of what I just said, right? This is because no statement is going to be specifically true and applicable in every case. In the landscape painting, a mountain usually denotes yang because it is big and hard, but in a picture that focuses on the ocean, mountains may appear in the distance, like an old Chinese painting, thus denoting yin because they are relatively small and passive. The meaning of the mountains is determined by by context. So, like, okay, yes, mountains are yang in nature, but in this painting where it's, like, really showing the mist and the water, and it's about the water, and the mountains are just like the backdrop, and they're barely visible. Obviously they're yin in contrast to what else is going on in the painting. The same is true of the body. A rapid pulse, for example, is considered a sign of heat. The correspondence between rapid pulse and heat is about as rigid a correspondence as can be found in Chinese medicine. Yet there are cases in which even a rapid pulse can have a different or opposite meaning. A patient may be lying listlessly in bed, covered by many blankets. He is short of breath, his face is pale, and his body is puffy. He has no appetite, his stools are watery, and he has a pale, moist, swollen tongue. These symptoms make up a pattern of deficient cold disharmony, a yin disharmony, even though his pulse has 120 beats per minute in this case. And that is something we're going to talk about as well, because we don't use, like, you want to make sure that you're taking the pulse of your patient for a full 60 seconds on each side, so that we have the full, and you're comparing it to your own regulated breathing cycle, so that you are taking a full pulse, right? So this case here, the abnormally fast pulse, usually a sign of extreme heat, or yang signifies extreme weakness, or in. A is usually A, but sometimes it is not A. And that is, as you study Chinese medicine, it's just going to be a constant mind F. Because you're going to be like, but this is supposed to be present. Wait, but they're pregnant. They're supposed to have a slippery pulse. But wait, they just ate. They're supposed to. Why isn't their pulse slippery? Or why is it wiry on the left? And because A is not always A. That's why. That's what I'm going to say all the time. So learning a detail A, for instance, is not worth much until the full circle of Chinese medicine has been traveled, at which time A will show itself to be rich and useful. The part can only be known when the whole is apparent. And I love that, because you can apply that to even, like, on a spiritual level, healing work, right? Like, you don't really get the truth until you've seen the big picture of anything. Or taking a step back and seeing how the timeline, you're looking at the timeline and how things have gone and how things have created themselves to be. And you're like, whoa, it can be a huge, huge wake up call to a person to be able to just have a moment like that in their own spiritual life, to be able to take a step back and go, okay, I see this timeline. I see how things have played out. Maybe it's time for me to walk away, or maybe it's time for me to acknowledge this, or maybe it's time, we're a lot better off in just behaving as human beings that are of love and of kindness in this world if we tend to not label ourselves, right? And not be like, oh, well, I've always, like, even like A isn't always A, right? I've always been this way. Or somebody tells you, right? Like, oh, but you've always loved this. You've always been this. Yeah, I don't anymore. I'm different now. A isn't always A. You know what I mean? Maybe I'm getting a little off topic. The part can be only known when the whole is apparent, right? Everything in context. This dialectic, this circularity is a kind of catch-22, but it is also a central aspect of the medicine's artistry. And that's why I do consider myself an artist. Maybe I don't like paint or draw or anything like that, but I consider myself an artist of the human body. Any Chinese medical practitioner should be. And also, there may be like artistic tendencies within that person as well, right? Whether it be like being really good at editing or, you know, cooking or dance or reading or helping people, whatever, you know, like everybody has, I think every single person is an artist. And I think we live in a world where art is like, what's the saying? There's a saying, I forget who says it, but the world is only as free as it allows its artists to be. And so, like, you know, as we're kids, we're all these like little artists, and then we sort of get shrouded by life and forget what our art is. And art can be anything. Art can be like planting a garden, or, you know, building like a fountain in your backyard for the birds. Or art can be how you do your makeup, how you dress yourself, how you move your body, how you clean your kitchen. Everything can be art, honestly, in my opinion. It's just, art is just truly about self-expression from a very deeply personal place. And how the world receives that is how the world receives that. The artist doesn't make art in order for the world to receive it. They make art to express themselves. And David Bowie said it, right? Like, don't ever forget why you started making this art in the first place. It wasn't for the people. It was for you to try to heal your own wounds. Like, you made this art to heal yourself. You made this music to heal yourself. And so remember that. Remember when life happens, don't forget where you came from, right? So the Chinese interplay of whole and parts does not lend itself to book elucidation. The sequential, linear book form can only attempt to approach the intricacies of the Chinese system, but the nature of the difficulty at least can be made explicit. The Chinese resistance to revealing fixed and essential forms has another implication that is worth noting. The word diagnosis is sometimes used in this book as a convenience for the reader. As we have said before, for Chinese medicine, pattern is a better translation than diagnosis, because it has an important implication. For the Chinese, a pattern or diagnosis is mainly an emblematic category that allows for an exchange of words. It is not meant as a label for people. It has no existence as an abstract truth that exists independent of the patient. As the anthropologist Judith Farquhar has noticed, it looks like the name from Shrek, Farquhar or whatever, Farquhar, has noticed in other domains of Chinese medicine, such statements function as allegorical resources for clinical thinking. Lord Farquhar, whatever. The pattern description has meaning in practice, not as a fixed ontological entity. As the medical scholar Arthur Kleinman has described, they are a serious attempt to codify complex, subtle, interactive views of experience into theoretical or therapeutic formulas that claim contextual rather than categorical application. They are tentative, meant to be tested in practice. The Chinese physician realizes that they are a limited attempt to capture what is necessarily intangible. Before reading the rest of the chapter, the reader, especially the casual one, should be alert to another potential problem. The rest of this chapter assigns a common interpretation to representative pieces of the human terrain. For some general readers, these descriptions may be tedious. It is worth knowing that it is not necessary to retain or memorize any of the details. One can just skim the information in this chapter and easily follow the rest of the book's attempt to explain pattern perception. Well, that's fine if you just want to read the book, but obviously you need to memorize it if you're going to become a practitioner. So the 4 examinations. ꜱɪฉุᴏ. The neophyte Chinese physician encounters a patient in 4 stages. The 4 stages are called the 4 examinations because each one focuses on a different way of recognizing signs in a patient. And if you refer to the yin-yang theory video, I do talk about the 4 pillars, which are different from the 4 examinations. The 4 examinations are looking, listening, and smelling. These are 2 words that are the same word in Chinese. Asking and touching are the last. The physician completes each of the examinations, gathering signs to weave into the final diagnosis. The signs themselves may fall neatly into place, pointing unanimously to a particular disharmony, or they may seem to contradict each other, requiring the physician to interpret closely and carefully before making a determination. Right? So, like somebody who has a certain condition, and then we think, okay, well, that's supposed to present with slippery pulse on the right, or it's supposed to be, but then it's wiry, right? It's like, okay, this is contradicting my diagnosis. Let's look deeper, right? Because it may just be a very complex pattern of disharmony. Some signs, like those of the pulse or tongue, are more important than others and are given greater weight, like I mentioned earlier. They bring the bodily landscape into focus. So we can talk all day, but then we touch the patient, we look at the tongue, and that's going to really confirm or not confirm our diagnosis. Some signs, like headache or blood in urine, are looked on more as complaints beneath which a disharmony is lurking and are given little diagnostic weight. These complaints demand interpretation and clarification from accompanying signs and symptoms. A complaint is the problem that brings a person to a physician. The patient will usually mention his or her complaint. A sign, however, is something that the doctor looks for, but that the patient would not necessarily know or talk about. There are countless number of possible signs, symptoms, and complaints. This discussion is limited to those signs that are most characteristic of Chinese diagnosis and that make the most important contribution of pattern discernment. And that is really where the weight of Chinese medicine does, a lot of its weight can come in to the Western eye and mind and be whoa, right? When we ask questions based off of our knowledge as Chinese medicine practitioners, so, okay, they tell us their problem, and then we ask a question to confirm or eliminate that pattern that they're presenting. For instance, let me think of something. They come in with tremors, right? Maybe there's some interior liver wind going on. They're they don't have Parkinson's. They're just they're I've been shaking. I don't normally shake, something like that. And then we take the pulse, but it's not wiry and it's not deep and it's on the surface. And so, maybe we look into further testing, and maybe there's so we ask them, did you previously, have you experienced any loss lately or something? Did you just run a marathon last week, right? And then, so we can sort of help them read, they're oh, wait, helping people by asking the right questions, we get the right answer. like something is not always as it seems. It can contradict itself. It's like, okay, so basically what I'm saying is you don't treat a patient based off of just their signs and symptoms, because otherwise you would just be practicing Western medicine. Like, oh, the person comes in shaking. Oh, okay, like they have tremors. Okay, give them a drug for that. As opposed to being like, what's really going on? Like maybe that person, is like, hasn't hugged somebody and in like a year, maybe they haven't released any oxytocin and they're just a ball of anxiety, and they just, like need to go get a massage, or they need a hug, or like, they lost a loved one, or they're, just, there's so many underlying factors, right? Or they're cold, right? Maybe they're shivering, like who knows? But it's so important we ask the right questions. And sometimes, like for instance, if somebody comes in and they're having like a younger girl in her 20s, and she's having like severe cramping and severe dysmenorrhea and menorrhagia, and she's just like in so much pain, right? While during and not during her period, just throughout the month. And you're like, okay, what, so you want to treat her? Well, the things that we would ask, right? Based off, like, we want to make sure that we're giving the patient proper advice as well. Like if, say, they're wearing a short skirt and it's middle of winter and their legs are all open and they have a big winter coat on, but tights, and then just like it's like, okay, that could be, did you sit on like a cold surface outside with your friends wearing just like those tights, because there could have been cold that attacked through there, right? And so we have to just know, like, basically asking the right questions to because sometimes things aren't always as they seem. That's what I'm trying to say. And being able to ask the right questions is, you're going to, if you like, you could waste 2 hours with a patient sitting there going over your 10 questions. How are your stools? How are you this? How are you that? Right? But ultimately, when you know the theory and you have the classics and all the classics in your head, like your brain is an index roll, and you just are full of all that knowledge and that theory, then the patient comes in and you might be the one in the room that's like, oh, like that girl just sat on a cold surface. You ask, oh, did you sit on a cold surface? Oh, did you, like something so simple, right? That it could be presenting as this like really like bad disharmony, and treated as such could actually make the person worse, right? And so like, another good example, right? With, this isn't the greatest example, but this is sort of another concept that, like, with eating disorders, right? In Western medicine, it's all the mind, right? You send them to a therapist. It's all like a disorder of the mind, and the therapy and the healing is usually done like through the mind. Or if they're like super far gone, maybe they'll go to like a rehab where there's some physical whatever. But ultimately, in Chinese medicine, what I learned in the early days, and I thought this was fascinating, was it takes the pressure off the mind a little bit. Like, there is an aspect of anorexia and bulimia nervosa that is for sure a heart, like there's mental aspects to it, right? But there's a huge portion of people who suffer from these things with just spleen qi deficiency or spleen yang deficiency or spleen disharmony patterns and heart mixed with the heart. And then, so if you treat the spleen, all of a sudden that person actually might eat and feel good because the spleen's transporting. And all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, I don't get severe anxiety every time I put food in my body because I know my body's like doing what it's supposed to now. And all of a sudden that person gets better because you've treated the spleen, as opposed to just like only treating the mental aspects. So you're coming at, that's what I love about Chinese medicine, is it does in a lot of cases take like the pressure off the person. And it's not always like, oh, you're like something's wrong with your head. Like, what if you just don't want to eat because you don't feel good when you eat, because you have a weak constitutional spleen, because your mom had a spleen Qi deficiency, your grandma did, you're born with it, you were on antibiotics as a kid, your spleen's shot by the time you're like 12, and then you put food in it, and and then you have maybe a tough home life, and you're anxious, or maybe you grow up not having enough food, whatever. Food is such a whole thing that there's a mental aspect of it, but there's also a spleen and stomach aspect of it. And so when we go in and we like ask the right questions, we have so much more reach. You know what I mean? Like, a true Chinese medicine doctor really doesn't like have to ask a lot of questions, but the ones they do, like I remember my teachers and stuff, like it was just sort of a one question thing like they didn't have to say much, they didn't have to ask much, they can see it, you know. And they don't need to tell you this, right? They're not like, let's teach you how I'm going to treat you and what's wrong with you, you know. It's just sort of like they're there for you to take the pressure off, right? Because you come probably from a world where like everybody's just trying to diagnose your head and nobody's even like looked at your organs, you know? So, on that note, the signs themselves may fall neatly into place, pointing unanimously to a particular pattern, disharmony, or they may seem to contradict each other, like I said this before, so requiring the physician to interpret closely and carefully before making a determination. Some signs, like those of the pulse or tongue, are more important than others and are often given greater weight. They bring the bodily landscape into focus. Some signs, like headache and blood in urine, and I already did say this, are looked on more as complaints beneath which a disharmony is lurking and are given little diagnostic weight. These complaints demand interpretation and clarification from accompanying signs and symptoms. A complaint is the problem that brings a person to the physician. The patient will usually mention his or her complaint, however, something that the doctor looks for, but that the patient would not necessarily know or talk about. And there are countless number of possible signs, symptoms, and complaints. And this discussion is limited to those that are most characteristic of Chinese diagnosis and that make the most important contribution to the pattern discernment. So the chapter also tends to emphasize somatic signs before these are considered easier for a beginner to learn. Other perceptions and signs that have to do with overall impression or gestalt are accurately accessible to only experienced physicians. An individual sign or symptom may point to a particular organ or quality of disharmony. This chapter describes signs that point to the most commonly found qualities of patterns, the basic shades. The major qualities, of course, are yin and yang. Disharmonies always involve imbalances of yin and yang. For additional refinement, the yin and yang archetypes are often broken down into subcategories: deficiency and excess, cold and hot. When the reference is to proportion of textures, deficiency is the yin aspect and excess the yang. With reference to temperament and level of activity, cold is yin and hot is yang. The terms cold and hot, of course, designate normal aspects of the body as well as environmental factors, pernicious influences, and qualities of disharmony. Their meanings in any given situation can be distinguished only by the context in which the words are used, but in this chapter, they will be considered as qualities of disharmony. As I read, I'm like noticing how Mike Myers always said Canadians do like upspeak, right? Up talk or whatever, or like at the end of a sentence be like, our voice gets higher. I'm laughing at myself. Looking is the next one of the 4 examinations. So we've covered now Sijian, just the intro. So we have looking is the first one, right? We see them in the waiting room. And then we have obviously listening, smelling, wenjian, asking, wenjian as well. And then we also have, lastly, touching, right? So the pulse. So we're going to get into all of that in detail. And there is a lot of information. So I think what I'm going to do is make this a separate video for just pulse diagnosis, because that's also the way we learn it in school. We learn it separately as well. So first, looking, Wang-zhen. The first stage of the 4 examinations is looking. In the looking examination, the physician tends to at least 4 characteristics that are visible to the eye. The first is general appearance, including the patient's physical shape, patient's manner, the way he or she behaves during the clinical encounter, and the quality of the patient-physician interaction. The second is facial color. The third characteristic is the tongue, including the material of the tongue itself, the coating of the tongue, and its shape and movement. So we're going to do a separate video on just tongue diagnosis and a separate video on pulse diagnosis. This is just going to be like the 4 examinations type theory video. So the second is the facial color, and the third characteristic is the tongue. Said all that. The fourth is the bodily secretions and excretions. So as if you've ever seen a Chinese medicine practitioner or you're in school, we ask about the stools and urine. These characteristics are presented in the order of observation by the physician. In order of their importance to the novice doctor, however, that is how much weight they are given when the doctor begins to discern patterns. They are tongue, facial color, secretions and excretions, and appearance. The patient's physical shape is an indication of his or her health. A person whose appearance is strong and robust is likely to have strong organs. When disharmonies, and when we get into facial diagnosis too, you can kind of see the organs on the face a little bit as well, which helps. When disharmonies occur in such a person, they are likely to be those of excess. That is in a person who is robust and strong appearance and likely to have strong organs. A weak-looking, frail individual is more likely to have weak organs and therefore have disharmonies of deficiency. Someone who is overweight is often prone to deficient qi, all the more so if he or she tends to be pale and swollen. Heaviness can also be a sign of a tendency toward excess mucus or dampness. A thin person, especially one with sallow complexion, narrow chest, and dry skin, a dried prune-like appearance, is often prone to deficient yin or blood, right? Because we know that blood goes to all the tissues to like nourish and keep them moist, right? So if there's a deficiency in it, they're going to see like a sallow, dried out, prune-like appearance. Great wasting of flesh or if you're like, in your 30s and have spent like the whole day in the sun and you're like, ugh. Great wasting of flesh in the course of a long illness suggests that the essence is exhausted. For acute illnesses, signs of shape are generally the least reliable aspects of a patient's appearance. For chronic illness, they show long-term predispositions to certain kinds of disharmony. The Neijing states, yang is movement, yin is quiescence. This is the key to examining a patient's manner and emotions. A person who is agitated, outward talkative, aggressive, and irritable is usually manifesting a yang tendency. And like we all also have our original makeup, right? Like certain people, and that I talked about this in the previous video, about how like somebody is going to be either like naturally a little bit more yang in nature or a little bit more yin in nature. And like there is like you don't have to like become a different person. There's certain people that are just more extroverted and more lively and stuff, and so you don't treat them off of that, right? Like if they're naturally a more lively young person, it's looking at it in an excessive form, right? As opposed to being like, oh, we have to make them yin. Well, no, you're not going to make like a yang type person, like you want to balance them out, but you don't want to try to make them like a recluse, like a yin type person, right? And vice versa for a yin type person. We're just balancing it out. We're not like trying to create them into like the other somebody else. Someone who is overweight is often prone to deficient qi. Oh, I already read that. For acute illnesses, signs of shape are generally the least reliable aspects of a patient's appearance. For chronic illness, they show long-term predispositions to certain kinds of disharmony. The Neijing states, yang is movement, yin is quiescence. The key is examining a patient's manner and emotions. A person who is agitated, outward, talkative, aggressive, and irritable is usually manifesting a yang tendency, and a passive, inward, quiet manner is usually yin. Yin, heavy, forceful, ponderous movement is typically part of a disharmony of excess. And then frail and weak movement usually indicates deficiency. Weak movement is usually part of heat pattern. Slow, deliberate movement is usually part of a cold pattern. And that's in my last video too on the external pernicious influences. If the patient, when in bed, stretches his feet, removes the covers, or moves away from the heat, he may well be suffering from a heat disharmony. If, on the other hand, the patient curls up in bed, likes to be covered, and wants to be near the heat, the doctor would suspect a cold condition. The assessment of the patient-physician interaction is critical for Chinese medicine, but its method is often transmitted to the aspiring physician only during clinical training. It is considered difficult to write about and capture. So true. That's why I'm talking about it. But some examples are helpful. More details will be discussed later. So from a modern Western perspective, this examination of the clinical encounter is often dismissed as subjective. But from the Chinese viewpoint, it may be the only aspect of the human landscape that the practitioner actually witnesses. Like, I love that they said that, because it's basically implying that the patient could just fully lie to you, right? And it's your job to see through the bullshit. And most patients do. I'm not gonna like get into the politics of this, but it's a huge reason I'm not practicing in the province of BC, because I don't really think people are that honest with themselves. I don't really want to like be constantly treating people who are lying to my face. I mean, that's fine if that's what other people want to do, but I don't. I think in China, it's different. It's sort of an unwritten language, you know, like Chinese culture, they're not like out talking about shit. They know how to like read between the lines with each other, and they don't have to really say it out loud, and they'll just know, you know? Whereas here, it's like overlooked all the time and still lying, you know? It's like not trying, it's not like not saying it to have it be said. It's like just ignoring it completely. And like, I can't deal with that. I won't work with that type of energy. So this is the key. Sorry for my water. So basically it's saying that every nuance of the interaction from the patient and the clinician, or any subtle shift in appearance, can contribute to the physician's overall interpretation. For example, if the patient tries to take care of the physician, I just thought of like, you know, somebody walks into like a therapy session, right? And like the therapist is sitting in their chair with their notepad, and then the person sits down and they're like, "How are you doing?" to the therapist. That's what I thought. That's the image I got of that, right? It's like, wait a minute, hold up. A good therapist isn't going to tell you their problems. They're going to be like, "How are you doing?" That's what we're here for. How are you doing? You know? That's a good doctor as well. For example, if the patient that's a true story, by the way. For example, if the patient tries to take care of the physician suspects dampness. If the patient cannot, because, right, dampness is like cloying energy. It's like baggage, literally. And like, so, you know, being overly nurturing in unnecessary situations, or just like wanting, like people pleasing type energy is what it is, right? Which usually stems from a person who has had to like earn love as a kid growing up. It wasn't just freely given. And so therein lie, like that can be really chronic damp. That's like deep-seated stuff where you do want to probably address extraordinary meridians in such cases to get to the deep past life stuff. If the patient, or just childhood stuff, you don't treat people's past lives, my apologies, but to get to the deep root childhood stuff of their physical reality that they are in this body. If the patient cannot explain the symptoms clearly, mucus is probably present, right? Like somebody who's just like not really like able to talk, like to me today, I probably have a bit more mucus because I'm just not as articulate and eloquent. Like it can be a little like phlegm, right? Phlegm, dampness, we know affects the mind, right? There's insubstantial and substantial phlegm. There's the phlegm from a Western medicine point of view that you can see and touch and feel, and there's phlegm that's in Chinese medicine we call non-substantial phlegm. It's the phlegm that gets caught in your brain and your tissues and your organs, and it makes you slow. Literally, it makes you kind of like ugh, over time. So that's why it's really, really, really important to resolve phlegm throughout your lifetime, just through diet and exercise and everything. If the physician feels unreasonably pressured by the patient, because extreme like mania or like extreme mental illness from a Chinese medicine perspective is phlegm is always present, or in extremely complex patterns that are hard to diagnose. If the patient feels unreasonably pressured by the patient, a liver excess is likely. If the patient presents complaints with a deep angst that seems dispatient, If the patient seems If the patient presents complaints with deep angst, like all the time, like this and this, and that seems disproportionately fearful, a kidney disharmony may be lurking, right? Like we're talking the hypochondriac type vibe, a bit negative. If the patient's pessimistic, if the patient seems extremely shy or vulnerable, easily blushes or touches the wrist of the physician in an effort to make human contact, the heart organ is likely to have a disharmony. We've all seen that, right? Like, somebody wanting our approval in a social interaction, but we don't know them, and they touch our arm or our shoulder. Maybe we've done that to other people, but that's literally saying like it's a heart organ disharmony, right? Because this type of awareness can be endlessly refined. And like this is where the line gets a little bit, because obviously if your best friend you haven't seen in 3 years, or your person your biggest crush comes in the door, it's not weird to touch their arm, right? But if it's somebody you don't know and it's reaching, right? It's reaching for a connection. It's telling the patient that this person doesn't have connection in their life. They're deeply needing to connect with me, which is not normal behavior to try to do with a physician. For example, the physician can pay attention to how the patient reacts to various emotional attitudes he or she intentionally gives in the encounter. A patient who becomes especially attentive or reactive to slight shifts in emphasis during the encounter may reveal much of the underlying pattern. A patient's sensitivity to the physician's expression of worry or sympathy may mean spleen. Like, if the patient's like, okay, this is, the practitioner's like, this is, what's going on, this is what we're going to treat. And then the patient's like, I'm fine. You know what I mean? Like, don't worry about it. I'm good. Like, actually, I'm good, right? It's like, whoa, there's some liver stuff there, spleen stuff. A reaction to assertiveness implies the liver, right? So somebody's like, this is what I would like you to do for the treatment plan. If you can just avoid drinking cold liquids and avoid red meat this week, as well as seafood, to reduce any like shellfish and any heat producing foods. And they're like, well, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm gonna eat food, it's whatever, like that. Okay liver. Inappropriate shifts in discussion relate to the heart, right? You're talking about one thing, and then they start talking about their ex-boyfriend and how he was this, and all their mom, and it's like, whoa, where are we going with this? And you're asking them about their bowels, for instance, right? And then a deep, easy recognition of sadness may indicate a lung disharmony. So, yeah, we see grief a lot in the lungs, like, present with grief, right? When somebody's lost a loved one, it can really sit in the lungs for a very long time, and we have to be very mindful of that. But it can also hold with people for life. Like, if you've ever met somebody who just like, oh, how are you? Like, they just always seem to not be able to like express, like, it's everything. Oh, sorry. Like everything is very soft, and like, that can be like some deep-seated like lung pattern disharmony that should be addressed as well, right? Some grief that they could have been holding since childhood. Something happened, who knows, right? Facial color is the next one. So we're looking at the color of the face, its expressiveness and its moistness. Sorry for those of you that hate that word. I know it's one of those words for people. Are closely related to the body's qi and blood. The Neijing states that all the qi and blood of the meridians pour upward into the face. So the normal healthy facial color obviously depends on a person's racial and ethnic origin, climactic conditions, and occupation, right? Somebody who like works outside all the time, probably going to have more like tan skin. In general, however, a healthy face is shiny and moist. If an individual is ill but the face appears healthy, it suggests that the qi and blood are not weakened. So that's a good sign, and that the illness is not serious, right? Because the qi and blood is still reaching to the face and manifesting in the face. A withered face implies weakness of the vital textures and is less favorable prognosis. Abnormal facial colors have definite clinical significance. White is associated with disharmonies of deficiency or of cold. A bright white face with a puffy, bloated appearance is a sign of deficient qi or yang. And if the face is white, if the white face is lusterless and withered, it signifies deficient blood. Sometimes the face is white when there is pain. Red appears with heat and fire. When the entire face is red, it is a sign of excess heat. The words heat and fire refer to the same phenomenon, but the word heat is usually used to talk about external heat, while fire is used to talk about internal heat. Like in Chinese, they're like, don't catch fire, like don't catch a fire, right? It's like, don't, because when you get the fire on the inside, right? Like that's some, it's not a good sign. Yellow indicates dampness or deficiency. A yellow face is especially related to internal dampness produced by a weak spleen not raising of pure fluids. So when the entire body, including the eyes, is yellow, the symptom, like yellow sclera, is always seen as indicating a damp condition. But like obviously if it's like a yellow, the yellowness of the sclera tends towards like a bright orange. The dampness is also hot, and we call that yang jaundice. And then if the yellow is pale, it's a sign of cold dampness, and we call it yin jaundice. So there's two types of jaundice in TCM. A pale yellow face without brightness may be a sign of deficient blood. Qing is the color, an important color in Chinese culture and medicine. The Chinese describe it as the color of dragon scales. It translated as like a blue-green, although connoting many shades between the blue and green spectrum. So blue and green indicate stagnation or obstruction of blood and qi, congealed blood and stagnant qi. It is also usually associated with patterns of excess because the liver rules the flowing and spreading, and because wind is associated with liver disharmonies, right? Like if you imagine like water sitting too long and getting like murky, right? Like the inability for the branches of the tree, the liver qi, to kind of like go and extend, like, and you know, the liver wants to be like, you know how trees dance in the wind? They like their branches actually like move in the wind and stuff. Like that's the liver energy we want in our body, right? We don't want our liver energy in our body, our tendons and ligaments to be like without the ability to dance, without the ability to bend in the wind, right? We want that flexibility. We don't want them to be rigid and break in half and dry. Like, like that's not the vibe of yin and yang and harmony. So we have the blue-green being associated with patterns of excess because the liver rules flowing and spreading, and because wind is associated with liver disharmonies. Qing also appears when there's a liver just like bluish-green tinge when there's a liver disharmony or wind present. In the case of extreme obstruction, Qing, blue-green, may also acquire a purplish tinge, which we know purple, blood stasis. So darkness or black is also associated with deficient kidneys, right? So, and congealed blood, like chronic blood stasis. This color often arises from a prolonged chronic illness. The blackness may be especially evident under the eyes, right? So we know when we see somebody who has like deep dark circle, like not just somebody who didn't sleep last night because they were partying, and like somebody who has deep set dark circles under their eyes, we know there's a kidney deficiency present, potentially some prolonged chronic illness. Tongue is our next one, tongue, and then we're going to do pulse in the next video, because pulse is, I want to draw it out for you. It's quite extensive, and it is a very important part of TCM. Not that any other isn't, but it's something that requires a lot of attention. Observing the tongue is one of the 2 pillars of the 4 examinations. The other is feeling the pulse. One elderly Chinese physician, a teacher of the author, described the tongue as a piece of litmus paper that reveals the basic qualities of a disharmony. Many signs may be interpreted only when the entire configuration can be... I'm laughing just because I haven't read this book in so many years, and some of it makes me like... I love Chinese medicine. What can I say? It makes me laugh. It makes me smile. It makes me happy. It makes me better. It's just, there's nothing bad about this stuff. I don't know why anyone would dislike it. Many signs may be interpreted only when the entire configuration can be seen, but the tongue interpretation is always essential. It is often the clearest indication of the nature of a disharmony and its pattern, reliable even when other signs are vague and contradictory. When talking about the tongue, the Chinese physicians make a distinction between the tongue material and the coating of a tongue. The Chinese word for the tongue coating can be best translated as moss or fur. The tongue material and tongue moss are treated as 2 separate elements of tongue examination. The tongue material can be various shades of red and can have varying degrees of moisture. A normal tongue is pale. Write this down. A normal tongue is pale, red, and somewhat moist. The characteristic healthy color is the result of abundant qi and blood carried to the tongue by smoothly moving qi, right? Because we learned from the previous videos, right, that the tongue is like a offshoot of the heart. It's like a sprout from the heart, kind of, and controls speech. The dry, pale tongue is more likely to be deficient blood. If it is wet, it is more likely to be deficient qi. A red tongue is a redder than normal tongue and points to the heat condition in the body, a heat condition in the body. A scarlet, like really red tongue, is deeper red than a red tongue and points to extreme heat condition. In a disharmony characterized by external heat, it indicates heat that has entered the deepest levels of the body, right? That scarlet tongue is not a good sign. Because the way we look at pathogen, like external pernicious influences come into the body, combined with already disharmonies present in the body, and the goal of the Chinese medicine doctor is to we have to meet the path. We have to figure out where the pathogen is, right? How far it's gone deep, and what is the best way to eliminate it. The pathogen is much easier to get rid of if it's closer to the surface of the body, because we can expel it through sweat and lots of other different ways, right? But when it's so deep inside, it's a lot harder to treat, and usually means chronic condition. But it doesn't mean it's not treatable. A tongue with a dark... Okay, where am I? So a purple tongue usually indicates that the qi and blood are not moving harmoniously and that there is a pattern of stagnant qi and congealed blood. A pale purple tongue means that the obstruction is related to cold. Reddish purple is a sign heat is related, is a sign of a heat-related injury to the blood or fluids. In general, if the lack of flow is due to cold, the tongue will appear moist. If it is due to heat, the tongue will appear dry, right? Because heat dries things up. A purple tongue may also be associated with liver's failure to flow or spread properly. A tongue with the dark tinge signifies some form of stagnation. We know like blood stasis if they have purple lips, right? But with the purple tongue, the coating, fur or moss on the surface of tongue is a result of, we know that with the purple a dark tinge signifies some form of stagnation. We don't know if it's might be like stagnation of qi, blood, all that stuff. The coating, fur, or moss on the surface of the tongue is a result of spleen activity. So during its vaporization of pure essences, the spleen also causes small amounts of impure substances to ascend, like smoke. These substances come out in the tongue. Some medical literature, in fact, refers to the tongue's moss as smoke. The moss is thus intimately related to digestion and can reflect the state of the digestive system. And obviously, if you are a smoker or you know people that have smoked in your life, you know that they tend to brush their tongue a lot, right, to get rid of that moss so that it's not... even like food we eat, people that have like really bad diets, it's gonna show on the tongue. The other activities of the body also leave The other activities of the body also leave impressions on the moss, evidence of bodily states that are visible to the physician. The tongue moss covers the whole surface or patches of the surface of the tongue. It can vary in thickness, color, texture, and general appearance. In a healthy individual, the density of moss is relatively uniform, although it may be slightly thicker in the center of the tongue. The moss is thin, whitish, and moist, and the tongue material can be seen through it. A thin moss can be normal, but during an illness, it may be a sign of deficiency. A very thick moss, so we know a normal tongue has a thin white coating, right? That's normal. A very thick moss is nearly always a sign of excess. Moss that is puddled with moisture is a sign of excess fluids, usually due to deficient yang or fire, the body's internal heat, but it is also a possible sign of other patterns such as dampness. Moss that is or tongue coating, the web calls it moss, that is very dry or sandpaper-like is a sign of excess yang or fire or of deficient fluids. We've all been dehydrated, right, and felt like we had cat's tongue once in our lives, maybe in the heat of the desert of Tar. A moss that appears firmly implanted on the tongue body, like grass sprouting from the ground, signifies strong spleen and stomach qi, right? So the moss that appears to be floating on the surface of the tongue is a sign. It's like, this is a weird one to diagnose. This is why tongue diagnosis, you can't do it like through a screen, in bad lighting, tongue out for 15 seconds, back in, get your patient to swallow, get that moisture back, and then stick it out again. So the tongue is very hard to diagnose. It takes a lot of, it takes years to learn, I think. And truly, what it's saying here is that it's hard, what I'm trying to say here is that it's hard to differentiate in a clinical setting what they're saying here, which is when it says that moss that appears to be floating on the surface of the tongue, that's not as easy to see as you might think, right? So there's moss that what we say is whether it has root or not. Is like, is the tongue coating have root, or does the tongue have, I think it's like shen also we say. I do have to refresh a bit on this, but that's why we're reading. Basically it's, shen, and root. Is the tongue coating just like floating on the surface of it, or is it actually does the grass have roots, right? Because if it's floating, if it's just sort of there, but it's like there, you don't know where it's not the grass with the roots, it's like, it's hard to see that, but once you see it a couple times, you'll see it. And it's being able, that's a good sign. That's a good prognosis. If if the tongue coating has root, whereas if it doesn't, that's a little bit more difficult of a situation to treat, not treatable. So the moss that appears firmly implanted on the tongue body like grass sprouting from the ground signifies strong spleen and stomach qi. Good sign. Like I said, moss that appears floating on the surface of the tongue is a sign that the stomach and spleen qi are weak, right? So it could be seen like after a heavy dose of antibiotics, even chemo. A greasy moss appears to be thick, or with chemo they just wouldn't have it. The tongue coating would be probably more like a peeled tongue when we see like the tongue coating's gone completely. Or I don't know, maybe not, maybe this, but it depends on the person. A greasy moss appears to be thick, oily film covering the tongue, or a portion of it. Usually we see phlegm, dampness, mucus there. That's the sign of that. It resembles a layer of white petroleum pasty moss, which is greasy but somewhat thicker, or white petroleum jelly or butter, and is a sign of mucus or dampness in the body. And then a pasty moss, which is greasy but somewhat thicker. The Chinese say looks like lumpy result of mixing oil and flour. Signifies extreme mucus or dampness. You've probably seen that on like Canadian cigarette packs. They'll show that tongue. When the moss seems to have been removed so that the tongue or a portion of it appears shiny, it is called peeled tongue. I just stated that, right? So as described by the Chinese, there's a peeled tongue coating, but then there's also one that is termed, we're going to go over it, but it's like, it's an even more intense version of that where it's like shiny and peeled, and it's, yeah. Forget the term, but we'll get into that. So the peeled tongue described by Chinese as resembling the flesh of an uncooked chicken after the skin has been removed. As a vegetarian, I don't like that idea. A peeled tongue is seen as a sign of deficient yin or fluids, or of spleen qi too weak to raise smoke. White moss, though also the color of normal moss, can appear in illness. It may signify cold, especially if there is excessive moisture in the tongue material. But if the white moss resembles cottage cheese, or as the Chinese say, unshaped tofu, it signifies heat in the stomach. A yellow moss points to heat. The deeper the yellow, the greater the heat. A black or gray moss is a sign of either extreme heat or cold. Extreme heat if the tongue material is red, extreme cold if it is pale. And one thing I will say, like when I was in my early mid-20s, first studying Chinese medicine, I did have a lot more phlegm present and dampness in my body because of the lifestyle I had back then, right? And so even recording this video, you probably would have heard, you can hear, what I'm trying to say is you can kind of hear it in somebody's voice and in their just throat and stuff, if there's like stuff going on there before the tongue is even seen. But then obviously the tongue is going to help you confirm or eliminate your diagnosis or pattern of differentiation. So, a yellow moss points to heat, a deeper yellow moss to greater heat. A black or gray moss is a sign of either extreme heat or cold, extreme heat if the tongue material is red, extreme cold if it is pale. The shape of movement of the tongue are also, shape and movement of the tongue are also considered, right? We've seen like small tongue, thin tongue. If there's teeth marks on the sides of the tongue, we know spleen qi deficiency. And so looking into basically a normal tongue is neither too big nor too small for the mouth, looking neither too swollen nor shriveled, because the teeth marks is a sign it's swollen from spleen qi deficiency and not being able to raise the impure, the pure from the impure and transport and transform properly. It should move with flexibility, the tongue I'm talking about, but not uncontrollably. So it shouldn't be slant, and it shouldn't be like, if they stick it out and it like sticks to one side, or if they stick it out and it's like really rigid, right? Or like tiny or super flabby and huge, right? These are all different symptomologies. The normal tongue should be smooth piece of flesh without cracks, and although it may have raised papillae, it should have no red pimples or eruptions. So obviously when we start to get into the cracks that's, you know, some like deficiency type patterns, right? Or heat type patterns where, or even if there's a crack that goes like a deep central crack down the tongue that goes all the way to the tip, we know that that's like some severe, like deep-seated emotional heart stuff issues. And anyways, we'll get into this symptomology, and I'll show pictures as well. A swollen tongue is puffy with scalloped edges, and like I said, with the the teeth marks, and as though it has been imprinted by the teeth. Its usual origin of swollen tongue is due to deficient qi or excess fluids. In rare cases, specifically spleen qi, in rare cases or instances, however, it may be a part of a pattern of excess heat in which the tongue will be also very red. Then we have a thin tongue, which is slender, small, and smaller than a normal tongue, and it's not usually a sign of deficient blood or fluids, or it is usually deficiency of blood or fluids. And then we have the stiff tongue that I referred to, and that's the one that lacks flexibility, resembling, as the Chinese say, a piece of wood. This type of tongue usually implies a wind, pernicious influence, or mucus obstructing the heart qi, which can definitely affect the mind big time. A trembling tongue seems to wiggle uncontrollably, like when they stick it out and it's shaking. When this type of tongue is pale, it is seen that it is a sign that qi is insufficient to regulate proper movement. If the tongue is red, the diagnosis is usually internal wind moving the tongue. A tongue that, like an internal wind, we know, like epilepsy, that kind of thing. A tongue that lolls like a panting dog's is most and often a sign of heat. And a contracted tongue that cannot be stretched out is usually seen in serious conditions when the accompanying tongue color is pale or purple. Cold is probably contracting the body. If a contracted tongue is swollen, it usually signifies mucus or dampness. And I did just see somewhere on Instagram a couple days ago about this person talking about how, like, regulating their nervous system, they studied this thing, and they started doing this thing where they would, like, stick out their tongue to kind of, like, regulate their nervous system if they were having anxiety, to calm them down for, like, a little bit. And I thought that was just an interesting thing. I'm not really sure, like, you know, but it makes sense from a Chinese medicine perspective, right? Like, if you have excess heat and you're trying to, like get it out of your body, and, like, it's going to the heart and the mind, and there's phlegm and all that, you know, it's like to just sort of, like, stick it out and have it sort of, like, this isn't a Chinese medicine thing. It's something I saw on Instagram, but they're like, oh, I wish I knew this so many years earlier, because I wouldn't have, like, I could have, like, quelled anxiety attacks or something like that. And even with, like, when we see in Down syndrome, sometimes they'll stick out their tongue, right? Maybe that is another form of, like, regulating their nervous system. I don't know, but I'm just piecing things in my head together right now. So do comment in the comments if you have ever had that experience where you were having anxiety and then you stuck out your tongue and it, like not like not like that, just like sticking it out for a second, like almost like a dog, like releasing the heat from their body after they've been panting outside running or something in the sun. I don't know. I'm just thinking of that, but comment your thoughts and ideas on that below. And if you have seen that Instagram video, and I would definitely like to research more into that. And then we are going to move on to the contracted tongue, and we already said that one, which is usually a contracted tongue. Well, we haven't. It cannot be stretched out. It's usually a serious condition, and the accompanying tongue color is pale or purple. Cold is probably contracting the body. If the contracted tongue is swollen, it usually signifies mucus or damp. And if the tongue material of the contracted tongue is red, it is a sign that the heat has injured the fluids. So cracks on the tongue are common and are considered normal if they have been present since birth, right? So like a few cracks at the back, maybe like diet or antibiotics will literally like can strip your tongue coat, like cause like your tongue coating to be peeled and cracked in the back and stuff, and are considered normal. So however, if they develop during an illness, right, so the tongue's normal, they come in, they have normal tongue, thin white coating, pale, moist, and then all of a sudden they come in and there's cracks on it. It's like, oh, what just happened, right? So it could have been a sign of a chronic or severe illness, and having gone on antibiotics. The exact interpretation depends on the tongue, because antibiotics themselves, they destroy the spleen qi, right? And that's why we're told to take probiotics while taking antibiotics, so we boost the spleen qi at the same time. You can't avoid taking antibiotics, but you can help boost the, if you're for certain things, right? But if in your lifetime, but if like infections and stuff, but if you can like just not run to the doctor every single time you get the cold to go on antibiotics, that's ideal, because really they do push the pathogen just deeper into the body at the end of the day. And then if the cracks in the tongue are red, they are usually a sign of heat injuring the fluids or deficient yin. Cracks in the tongue that are pale signify deficient blood and qi. Red eruptions, pimples, or thorn-like protrusions on the tongue, redder than the occasional raised papillae of the normal tongue, are usually signs of heat or congealed blood. And these signs, and like from fire, right? Almost like somebody who's had a lot of fire in the stomach and in the body. These signs often occur on only certain portions of the tongue. For example, the center of the tongue alone may be thickly coated, or only the sides of the tongue might be red, or a crack might appear just at the tip. But for such cases, particular areas of the tongue are said to correspond to particular organs. And I will draw that out to make it easier. But I'm going to do that in a different video, and we're just going to move on. So I'm just going to tell you, basically, we have the back of the tongue. The root of the tongue is the kidney area, right? And then the middle would be the center, the spleen, and the stomach. The tip of the tongue is the heart, very extreme tip. And then the lungs are like the space between the center and the tip, that front space. And then the liver and gallbladder are the sides, right? And that's how we can sort of figure out what's going on with the organs when we're looking at the tongue. If we see like orange sides, we know there's like some liver gallbladder stuff going on. So then we're going to move on to excretions and secretions. The principal secretion and excretions are phlegm, vomit, urine, and stool. Because phlegm and vomit may be seen by the physician, they are considered part of the looking examination. Urine and stool are usually discussed with the patient and therefore covered in asking examination. Clear, thin phlegm exuding from the nose and throat is usually a particular cold pattern. If the phlegm is sticky and yellow, it is a sign of heat. Sticky yellow looks concentrated or cooked, right? Like heat makes things congeal. A large amount of phlegm easily coughed up usually indicates dampness. Bloody phlegm is commonly a sign of heat injuring the lungs. And then thin, watery, clear vomit usually signifies cold and deficient stomach qi, as does vomiting of undigested food without a sour taste in the mouth. Whereas we know sour tasting vomit usually indicates stomach heat. Yellow, bitter tasting vomit, sign of liver and gallbladder heat. The bile is present. And that shit can ruin your teeth. So, yeah. Very important if you have anyone in your life who's suffering from, a disorder where they're like nauseous and throwing up all the time, or maybe they have bulimia nervosa, to make sure that you do take them to a Chinese practitioner to address the spleen, so that or a naturopath of some kind, somebody who can address their spleen and stomach energy before they do too much damage to their organs and teeth. Listening and smelling. Wen Zhen. And I don't think I said the Chinese for the Mandarin for these. They don't actually have one for excretions and secretions. So, listening and smelling, wen-zhen. This examination deals with a number of common signs, all about equally important in the weaving of a diagnosis. Voice and respiration are the first. Coarse, strong respiration may signify excess. Weak respiration or shortness of breath accompanied by weak, low voice and little speech suggests deficiency. And that I can use myself as an example. So like on 2 days before I get my period, I'm like all young and super like energy, like strong energy, strong voice. And then by the day your period ends, you're like, hey, I think I'm just going to relax. Like, you're deficient in blood, so your energy isn't as young, right? And it just really, it's our organs are completely, what's going on inside is what's going on outside, man. As above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul, as Hermes Trismegistus said. So we have the a sudden loss of voice suggests external pernicious influence, which we talked about in the previous video. Cold, damp, all that external, and while chronic loss of voice is usually a sign of deficiency. So somebody who's like always losing their voice. Wheezing most often suggests mucus, and we know that the kidneys need to be the kidneys assist the lungs in that they need to be able to like hold the chi down in order for there to not be wheezing. They need to be able to like hold the chi of the lungs, grasp it. Otherwise you might see weak wheezing. And then we have a cold or a heavy cough or a sudden violent one is a sign of excess. A dry hacking cough suggests heat or dryness. A weak cough is usually part of a deficiency pattern. Chinese medicine distinguishes between two main kinds of bodily odors that are present during illness. The smells are difficult to describe, and so the Chinese physician relies heavily on experience when interpreting them. One odor is characterized as foul, rotten, and nauseating, like the odor of rancid meat or rotten eggs. Such an odor signifies heat, like infections that smell and stuff. The second odor is less nauseating, but more pungent and fishy and may seem to hurt the nose. It is like the smell of fumes from bleach and indicates cold and deficiency. In the third, so we're going into asking wen-zhen. In the third of the 4 examinations, the physician ask questions, as would the Western doctor, and I talked a bit about this at the beginning of this video, and to discover important but not readily apparent information. So of course many questions may be asked, but only those that are most common and are essential for beginners to learn pattern perception are discussed here. So these cover the following topics: sensations of cold and heat, perspiration, headaches and dizziness, quality and location of pain, urination and stool, thirst, appetite and tastes, sleep, gynecological concerns, and a person's background, including medical and psychosocial history. Questions about hot and cold, pain, and medical history are generally the most important. The other signs discovered by asking may contribute necessary shadings to a pattern, but these signs are rarely decisive, right? Because with the 8 principles, we're trying to if you go back to the theory of yin and yang and 8 principles, you'll see you're always, every single thing we have to, yes, cold and heat in many cases can be present at the same time, but which one is it leaning more towards? That's what we're trying to figure out through the 4 examinations. So questions about hot and cold. In order for the questions presented here follows a traditional graduation that is used to help beginning students learn how to think in terms of patterns. They range from simplest to more complex. The purpose is to provide building blocks for the development of pattern recognition. So an experienced physician ignores this order. You're not going to have a doctor of Chinese medicine that's been working for 40 years come in to see a patient and have his clipboard and be like, go over the 10 questions, right? So the order of the experienced physician ignores this order or the entire idea of a fixed set of questions and instead facilitates a natural give and take. For an old timer, the clinical story comes out in a soul-to-soul encounter, right? Like how my teachers would always be like, the best Chinese medicine doctor is going to be able to like know what your diagnosis is before really you even get into the room, right? Just from you walking into the clinic, like waiting room. They can like hear you, right? Talking to the receptionist and stuff. They're already getting an idea of what's going on with you. So yeah, don't think you can like, come in and create your, like, if you plan to, like, if you have a story you tell everybody, right? Don't think that you're going to get away with it with the Chinese medicine doctor. You're going to be like, okay, sure. But they're going to see what's really going on. And that's why a lot of people feel really like safe and taken care of when they go see Chinese and just like noticed for once in their lives when they see a Chinese medicine practitioner. So we have sensations of cold and hot. In general, cold corresponds to yin and hot to yang for internally generated disorders. Subjective sensations of heat, feeling warm to the touch, or a dislike of hot weather or hot places can be a sign of heat. Cold is signified by the opposite, so constant chills or a preference for warm places, for instance. Acute fevers of external origin fall into the special category of febrile disease illnesses. So until very recently, such illnesses were usually considered life-threatening and were, in fact, a major cause of death. Fevers are therefore a central focus of most Chinese medical texts, as they are in the writings of Hippocrates and of other medical traditions. Febrile illnesses are the subject of Appendix A, and we get into that also in the ꜱᴜᴜ which I have a video on my channel. Check it out. Which deals mostly with like epidemic type febrile diseases. When a patient has sudden fever together with chills, it indicates that the body's qi is attempting to expel an external pernicious influence, right? So that's when we're like experiencing the symptoms. That's the fight between our immune system against whatever external pernicious influence that is attacking. It is not necessarily a sign of cold just because we're cold, right? If the fever persists but the chills disappear, the illness is said to have gone deeper. So remember that. If there's fever but the chills are gone, illness is said to have gone deeper, and the fever is a sign of heat. A low-grade fever, especially noticeable in the afternoon, or heat felt like what I just did, clearing my throat there, that's phlegm, right? Like that's substantial phlegm. And that's something that, probably need to drink more water today, maybe drink some green juice, right? So that's one, I just diagnosed myself, but that's one, somebody's who always clearing their throat like that, that phlegm may be present. But I also smoke, so there's that. If the patient has no fever yet fears cold, he or she is usually suffering from deficient yang or deficient qi, and especially if the condition is chronic. Interestingly, whether or not blankets make the patient any warmer is a helpful diagnostic distinction. If blankets increase the patient's warmth, the disharmony is probably in internal deficiency of yang. If not, the disorder may be an invasion of external cold pernicious influence. So we're going to do perspiration, headaches, dizziness, pain, urine and stool, and thirst, appetite, and tastes, as well as gynecological concerns, personal background, and then we're going to leave the pulse or touching ꜱᴜᴜ to the next video. So, perspiration occurs when the pores are open but not when the pores are closed. Both these conditions are affected by various disharmonies. If a patient perspires in the daytime, though he or she engages in little or no physical activity, spontaneous sweating, it indicates protective qi and is not properly regulating the pores, right? The wei qi isn't like circulating the kuli, the space between the skin and the muscles properly, and spontaneous sweating ensues because the pores on our skin are like, the qi, sufficient qi in the pores will keep them closed. But if there's deficient qi, the pores just open, even though we don't need to sweat, they're just releasing sweat it's like raining and you can't close the window type deal. So that's why we tonify qi to help regulate the space between the skin and the muscles to close the pores, so there isn't, just because spontaneous sweating can deplete your qi even more, right? It's like from qi deficiency and then further depleting your qi, but also with sweat comes blood, and then you're depleting your blood and your yang and your yin. It's all connected. So we want to stop that. And an excessive perspiration during sleep, night sweating, however, signifies deficient yin. Our menopausal patient, that night sweat, that's a generalized decline in yin going on. If no perspiration occurs during an illness with fever and other signs of external pernicious influence, the pernicious influence is probably cold that has obstructed the pores. If there is perspiration during such an illness, it suggests external heat opening to the pores, or perhaps a deficiency of qi hampering the proper regulation of the pores. The choice between these two possibilities would be based on other signs. If the fever breaks after sweating or perspiration, the pernicious influence has been expelled. So that's why we're meeting the pathogen where it is at. But say, for instance, the pathogen went too deep. We didn't check their tongue and their pulse. We thought the pathogen was still on the exterior. We go and try to treat them through sweating promote sweating herbs and all that. And we actually can really do damage, right? Because at that point, it's gone too deep. We need to meet it there and eliminate it through bowels and whatnot. Location. Perspiration. So again, if the fever breaks after sweating, the pernicious influence has been expelled. And that is if the pernicious influence is already on the exterior. Then we did our job, right? Or you can, you do it at home, right? You get a mild case. You get caught in the rain, you get a chill, you get home, you start feeling back of my neck's sore, and then, you sneeze, and I'm inside. So then you go, you have a hot bath, right then, hot shower, right then, timing is key, and you put on some sweatpants after, and you start sweating a little bit, have a hot tea, and you can actually really just do wonders just by releasing the surface at the right time. If you've been say you are on an airplane and you've coming back from a hot country, and you forgot to bring a sweater, right? So you're wearing shorts on the plane, and then there's air conditioning, you get sick. As soon as you get home, if it's not too long of a flight, definitely do release the surface techniques. Taking some mint tea, ꜱᴜ help release the surface, have a hot bath, But the problem with releasing the surface is it can only be done with an already strong person. You can't take an elderly person and dredge something out of them, with a lot of, you can't aggressively at all treat an elderly people, let alone their qi is not strong enough. So if you release the surface too much, you could actually really hurt them. So that there's that also. And that's also why they're more prone to be attacked by pernicious influence. So headaches and dizziness. Headaches may accompany any of the patterns of disharmony, but some broad distinctions between types of headaches can be helpful. Sudden headaches often appear with external pernicious influences, which describe the yang or qi of the head. Chronic headaches more often accompany internal disharmonies. Severe headaches may be a sign of excess, while slight annoying headaches are usually a sign of deficiency. And we know the parts of the head too, right? Whole head headache versus the front part of the head, forehead, stomach headache, sides of the head, liver, gallbladder headache, back of the head, urinary bladder headache, the whole head. I forget which the whole head is. I think the whole head is also bladder. And then we have the chronic headaches are more often they more often accompany internal disharmonies, whereas severe headaches may be a sign of excess. Slight, annoying headaches are usually a sign of deficiency. Oh, I didn't drink enough water last night. I didn't eat enough before bed. The organ most associated with headaches is the liver, right? Besides, the liver qi often rises when the liver is in disharmony. A physician may consider the exact location of the headache significant, right? Correspond what I just said. And that's based off of where the meridians pass through it. And like the sanjiao around the ear. So needling sanjiao 5 can also help a little bit if the headache crosses the sanjiao meridian. But ultimately, like, just use large intestine 4 for headache to draw it out. In my opinion, it's easiest. And dizziness, like headaches. So we know that the meridian that it passes through is that is through the part of the head, and thus the rest of the system connected to that meridian. So the meridian system connects to the organ itself as well. And dizziness, like headaches, can be part of any pattern of disharmony. So although it is most frequently seen in patterns of deficient yin or blood, this is this is dizziness. It also depends on right? Because if somebody's like weak of substance, right? They haven't eaten, there's no blood, there's no yin, there's no substance. It's like they start to get uprooted, get a little dizzy, right? I need food, that vibe. And always depends on the rest of the configuration for interpretations. So although it is most frequently seen in patterns of deficiency of yin or blood dizziness, it really does also depend on the rest of on its context, right? Because we definitely see dizziness in a lot of excessive patterns as well, right? Tinnitus and dizziness can go together in certain excess patterns. So always based off what it is in relation to something else. And then we have pain after cold and hot. This is the next most important subject of asking examination. Pain is often the patient's chief complaint, right? And the thing that brought him or her to the physician. Pain manifestation, and what's crazy about pain is we all say it, right? We're like, oh, pain is subjective. But it really is, right? And even in my previous video, it talked about, from the web, it talked about how when the blood and like when you have certain deficiency patterns, when the blood is deficient in the body, you are more, your nociceptors, and you are more receptive to pain, right? And so like there in and of itself is sort of a proof of that, in my opinion. So after hot and cold, we have pain. That's a big focus. And there's pain in the chest, for instance, indicating disharmony of the heart and lungs, pain in the flanks and rib cage, indicating liver and gallbladder disharmony, pain in the epigastrium or solar plexus, indicating stomach and spleen disharmony, abdominal pain above the navel, indicates disharmony of the spleen and intestines, abdominal pain around and below the navel indicates disharmonies of intestines, bladder, uterus, or kidney, groin, genital area, and hypogastrium, lower abdomen. And then pain in the liver meridian, pain indicates, so like pain in the genital area, hypogastrium, groin, and lower abdomen indicates liver meridian disharmony, right? Not necessarily treating the liver organ, but the actual meridian. And then lower back pain, we know signals kidney disharmony. That's where the kidneys are located. And the traditional or the Chinese physician is also concerned with the patient's description of the exact quality of his or her pain. And we'll go into great detail with that in another video. And because it is quite extensive, there's like moving, sharp, fixed, distending, all of it, right? And then there's B syndrome, which is another whole other thing about pain, a version of pain in Chinese medicine. So we have like the quality of pain and whether or not it is helped or made worse by cold or heat. And then, so for instance, like if you have pain that moves from place to place, that's wind or stagnant qi, sensation of heaviness type pain, dampness, congealed blood type pain, sharp and stabbing, usually fixed location. And then pain that's accompanied by bloating or a sense of fullness, stagnant qi, increase, like pain that gets worse when it's hot out and or damp, not hot, but like humid out, then that would be dampness present. And then there's pain that, I mean, what has a Western doctor ever been like, do you feel better or worse after you eat? Like, do you feel better when you eat or worse when you eat? Does that make the pain worse? Your Chinese medicine doctor will ask you that. So pain that increases after eating of like a specific, maybe it's abdominal pain or low back pain or whatever, that's a sign of excess. Whereas if the pain diminishes, like when you feel better after you eat, it would be a deficiency. And then pain that's aggravated, like don't touch, like it makes it worse if somebody touches you, obviously that'd be excess. Whereas pain that is relieved by touch or pressure would be deficiency. And then obviously pain that's diminished by cold would be heat. Pain diminished by cold would be, or by heat would be cold. But it did just, again, remember, A is not always A, it's in relation, right? So there are moments that completely contradict themselves where it's like, so, something might be relieved by heat, but then its root cause might actually be heat. You know what I mean? So definitely take everything you learn, just take it in, right? And then things can always contradict themselves at times, but there's always exceptions to the rule is what I'm trying to say. So in most cases, this is true. The time between the start of pain and when the patient finally makes the effort to see the physician can be important, right? So if the duration is short, the pain is likely to be shallow and more easily treated. Whereas if the interlude is longer, the pain may have become an integral part of the patient's negotiations in the world. So like somebody who's just had a chronic injury for so long, it's really shaped how they've made decisions and lived their life and how they tell their story. The deeper pain entwines in his or her life and often requires treatment directed at the inner organs, emotion, and spirit, because pain it sucks up chi, right? It can kind of like just exhaust you physically and take from your organs to kind of help with whatever deficiency is going on. And then then there is your disharmony or imbalance that needs to be brought back into harmony through balancing yin and yang. Urine and stool. Chinese physicians do not generally take urine and stool samples. We don't unless we refer you to your Western physician to do your blood work and get your results from that. They get the information they need from asking. So a patient whose urine is clear usually has like a patient who know what your urine looks like and all that. So we ask them if it's clear or not, if it's yellow. And then obviously like B vitamin, there's again things can make your urine yellow that isn't like internal patterns if you took a B vitamin, but just overall generally in the morning when you first wake up, what does your stool look like? What does your urine look like? Is it bright yellow? Is it clear? So obviously clear urine, cold pattern, while darkish yellow or reddish urine, heat, copious urine, like a lot of it or frequent during the nighttime, suggests the kidneys are not properly vaporizing water and point to a kidney deficient qi. So the scanty urine, not enough, is usually a sign of some types of excess, such as dampness or heat obstructing the bladder qi, although it can be a sign of deficient fluids. Frequent or scanty urination or painful urination, and that indicates dampness and heat in the bladder. An inability to complete urination, dribbling, or lack of force in the urination often signifies deficient qi, cold, or dampness. And then infrequent dry or hard stools can be a part of the configuration of heat excess, but depending on the accompanying signs, may also signify deficient fluids or deficient qi. Frequent water or unformed stools usually signify deficient yang, deficient qi, or dampness. Urgent diarrhea, especially when yellowish or accompanied by a burning sensation in the anus, is a sign of heat or liver excess. Stools that are first dry and then wet suggest deficiency. Undigested food and stools often suggest deficient yang of the spleen. So, thirst, appetite, and tastes. Chinese physicians commonly ask patients whether they are thirsty. This is because thirst is often a sign of heat, while lack of thirst often signifies cold. Thirst without desire to drink is a sign of deficient yin or of dampness. And then, so obviously we ask them, like, are you thirsty, but are you thirsty but not want to drink water, or are you thirsty but chugging water, right? Those are different. Appetite disorders, eating too much or too little, usually and we would ask that to differentiate whether or not if the yin deficiency was present. The thirsty without the desire to drink. And then we have the appetite disorders, eating too much or too little, usually signifies spleen or stomach disharmony due to deficient qi or dampness. We have stomach fire can cause like excessive, like famished hunger. Not because the person actually needs to eat, but because there's just stomach fire in the stomach. Unusual taste or like extreme spleen deficiency, just lack of appetite, spleen's not transporting and transforming, so like the stomach doesn't want anything. Unusual. So once we get its TNT going, then it's like, hey, I'm hungry. Bring me, I want to pump this hydrochloric acid out. Let's go. But, we live in a world where like people, the spleen's, spirit, intellect, overthinking, whether if you're a student, if you're use your brain a lot, if you're like mind work a lot and you're heavy duty stuff all the time, being like pushing yourself all the time, can overthinking, all that stuff can injure the spleen chi, right? So that can even just cause a lack of appetite. Stress, right? Thirst, appetite, and taste. And we have unusual tastes in the mouth. So that would be, first I just want to reiterate that the appetite disorders, too much or too little, would be from spleen or stomach disharmony due to deficient qi or dampness. And then usually taste in the mouth that may also indicate a disharmony. A bitter taste in the mouth suggests heat, most commonly as a condition of the liver and gallbladder. A sweet, pasty taste suggests damp heat in the spleen. Foul tastes often mean liver or stomach heat, while salty taste sensations may indicate kidney disharmony. Inability to distinguish tastes is usually part of a pattern of deficient spleen qi. And then we have sleep. In keeping with their emphasis on balance, the Chinese believe that people should have just enough sleep. Too little or too much indicates imbalance and disharmony. Insomnia, as described in Chinese texts, as yang unable to enter yin. The active unable to become passive. This usually means that blood or yin or both are deficient and capable of nourishing the spirit stored in the heart. There's therefore a relative excess of yang, which is not balanced and is unable to quiet down. Excess yang or fire in any other organ can also cause insomnia. The constant desire to sleep or excessive sleep is often a sign of deficient yang, deficient qi, or dampness. And then we have gynecological concerns, and obviously, and then personal background. We're gonna finish with that, or actually, personal background. We're gonna finish with that. So, gynecological concerns. Chinese physicians routinely ask female patients about gynecological matters. If a woman's menstrual period arrive earlier than usual, it may signify that heat is causing reckless movement of blood and of deficient qi, or that deficient qi cannot govern the blood, right? Because blood is the mother of qi. Everywhere blood goes, qi follows. And if blood, qi cannot, and then qi governs blood, but blood is the mother of qi. So if deficient qi cannot govern the blood, you're going to see reckless movement of blood, maybe bleeding, irregular bleeding, intermittent, all that, excessive bleeding in menstruation. The accompanying signs would make a distinction easy to arrive at. A red tongue would mean heat. A pale tongue would mean deficient qi. Late menstrual periods suggest deficient blood or cold, causing stagnation. So like somebody who has maybe amenorrhea, there could be like severe cold, stagnation, and deficient blood from malnourishment or overexertion as at a young age. Irregular menstruation is often a sign that the liver qi is not moving harmoniously. Excessive menstrual flow may signify heat in the blood or deficient qi. Insufficient flow or lack of menses, except during pregnancy, may mean deficient blood. Cold obstructing the blood or congealed blood, pale and thin menstrual blood points. Like pale and thin menstrual blood points to deficient condition. Very dark blood suggests heat, and blood that is purplish, especially if clotted, may indicate congealed blood. And if you're a female, you know there's stages during your cycle, during your menstruation that you go through. There's time, like you don't, if you see a lot of, you shouldn't see like clotting through the whole thing. There might be like a little bit of, it should be, there's actually, you can look online, but it should be, like maybe it shouldn't be bright red either, right? Maybe more at the beginning and then slowly gets paler as like near the end, right? But definitely look at, like, there is a blueprint for that to follow, what it should be. And then the personal background of, or no, I forgot this part. So excessive menstrual flow may, or I'll say this first, but late menstrual periods suggest deficient blood or cold causing stagnation. Irregular menstruation is often a sign of liver qi is not moving harmoniously, so we promote the smooth flow of liver qi to regulate menstruation. And excessive menstrual flow may signify heat in the blood or deficient qi. Insufficient flow or lack of menses, except during pregnancy, may mean deficient blood. And cold obstructing the blood or congealed blood. So I already read this, I know, but the pale and thin menstrual blood points to deficient condition. Very dark blood suggests heat, and blood that is purplish, especially if clotted, may indicate congealed blood. Copious, clear, or white and thin discharges, leukorrhea, suggests usually signify deficiency or dampness, and discharges that are thick and yellow or accompanied by itching or soreness of the vagina are often signs of heat and dampness. And I remember years ago treating somebody for leukorrhea that was kind of chronic, and I just did one treatment, and it was in school, and it was my own. I opened Daimai, the one that's the girdle around the waist, the belt, extraordinary meridian, as well as I think I did it like a Sanjiao 5 and a couple other points on her, but I didn't even needle to open Daimai. I actually just used tuning forks, the new moon on her and the full moon, and it worked, she said. So personal background. The Chinese physician wants to have a complete medical history of each patient. This is because patterns may reappear time after time, pointing to various irregularities or body activities. And because previous disharmonies may be affecting the patient's health, the patient's history is an additional sign in the diagnosis. The physician's general rule is that acute illnesses are associated with patterns of excess and chronic illnesses with patterns of deficiency, right? Because if somebody's like I said just a few minutes ago, right? If somebody's like suffering from something for a long period of time, it's going to damage the qi and eventually lead to deficiency. Whereas younger people are inclined towards excesses, right? Like little kids that get sick, it's like excess usually. A family medical history can also be very helpful in terms of hereditary diseases. And like that's because a kid has like pure yang qi. A kid is like pure yang qi, right? Just like all over the place running around and like, full of energy, limber. They're like, don't fall when they get hurt, like bing, 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 right? Little kids. So that's why like it is, they recover from illnesses so quick too, right? Because they get sick, then they release the surface, sweat it out, and then they're fine and back to normal. Now they're hungry in an hour, right? With a 60-year-old, it might not be the same recovery period. Like she has already had 60 years of damage, but at the same time, who's to say that age is real, right? I mean, somebody who manages their chi their whole life really well may be just as limber as a kid at 60, give or take a little bit there, obviously. At this point in history, all East Asian physicians would necessarily also take an inventory of the patient's biomedical status. Obviously, we need to know your history, your any previous bouts in health, and your families. Both in terms of diseases and treatments. Oriental medicine can no longer function as an isolated context. So in China, they have full hospitals that are, you have the ward, one area that's the Chinese medicine, TCM portion, and then the other part of the hospital that's the Western medicine. So like you can literally be wheeled in a stretcher or a wheelchair to go get your blood work done on the Western side, and then they bring it to the Chinese medicine doctor, they prescribe your herbs. Like, I mean, wouldn't that be nice in North America? So, because they know in China they're used together to treat diseases better, and whereas here it's like one or the other. You know, you don't have like Chinese medicine wards in our hospitals here. Medically and morally, the Oriental physician needs to know what conventional medical approaches may be more desirable, knowing when more information is needed and when not to treat a patient, or when to treat a patient in conjunction with other practitioners, has become a necessary skill for any Oriental physician who practices in the contemporary health world. Yeah, like when I first moved to BC and I called the acupuncture board for TCMPs in the province of BC, they were like, you know, but, and it's the same in Alberta. Like, you call the board and the first thing is like dial 1 to report malpractice, or like, right? Like, it's like basically, I mean, it's gotten a lot better, but like I'll be honest with you now, if you're in school, like, it's rare that you usually have like other medical professionals like respecting and working alongside with you. I'll be honest. Like, they might do it, but they believe what they're doing is obviously more important. You know what I mean? So I'm just going to be honest with you about that. That's my opinion. And I don't think it's at all that way in China, or, you know, it's definitely it's way more, it's revered there, right? Like, respected. And there's respected practitioners in North America, but I don't believe it's given the respect it deserves at all. Furthermore, potential herb, or I'll say first, the refinements of sensory discrimination and early disease detection available through sophisticated Western technology can add significantly to the understanding of the patient's condition. Sometimes an X-ray, an MRI, or a laboratory report is more sensitive and accurate than the best Oriental physician. And that's facts, right? Like, and as Chinese medicine practitioners, you always want to go get, if there's anything like actually going on, refer out. The best thing you can do is like refer out, go get x-rays, go get MRIs, especially for soft tissue damage. And then blood work is like key. You shouldn't even be treating a patient in Chinese medicine without like blood work that they have on you in today's world from their recent blood work. So while biomedicine can creatively, if they have any like thing that's like they're not just treating them for like a pain injury or something, while biomedicine can creatively add to information that is important to discern a pattern, this knowledge doesn't transform the Chinese medical work of detecting a unique set of yin and yang relationships. So in a chronic situation for a condition that will require a lengthy course of treatment, the physician needs to be deeply acquainted with the patient, right? Like, when you have a long treatment plan, it's like you're building a relationship with this person, trust. Inquiry concerning life behaviors such as the balance of activity, rest, diet, and food habits is important. So having discussions about that's your, you know, and most people will like not, it's very rare a patient will actually follow these things, right? Like, how many, even you yourself, right? Like the doctor, you know, like, oh, I probably shouldn't eat gluten or pizza for dinner, but like, I'm going to do it anyways, right? Or I don't know what your vices are. This deeper layer of a person I'll say first, even more critically, the physician needs to know what animates a person, what makes him or her tick, and what are the sources of strength and weakness, and what gives his or her life purpose and meaning, right? To be able to guide a patient back to themselves, to their harmony of yin and yang being balanced, to their true self, to their true nature, to the person they were before the world told them who they should be, when they really like to just like do something when they were 10 years old for fun, right? Like that person, we want to, you're building a relationship with this person in order, when you know what makes them animate and what makes them tick, you can help guide them to that place faster, right? This deeper layer, and you might find out that oftentimes they don't know, or they have never even had they've never maybe even asked themselves. So there's that as well. And that's another part of the connection that is very important, to have trust and just a safe space. It's all it really is. Being a doctor is about creating a safe space that people feel safe in. That's really what it is. And obviously being able to treat them. This deeper layer of a person, usually involving the spirit, what makes them animate and tick, can sometimes reveal the clearest delineation of a pattern. The physician may need to know about significant relationships, sources of pleasure and self-worth, right? If you had, say, your dad or your mom walked out on you as a kid, right? These are probably you're not going to tell your doctor this in the first treatment, but say you've been seeing them for a year or 6 months or something, then maybe you would want to share that with, and then maybe they'll put it in a heart 7, right? To address, or open Chong Mai, pericardium 6, spleen 4, right? Opposites. Yin Wei would be the pericardium 6 first. So, we have to, and that's another reason why I'm I choose to not practice today, because a lot of the times, people only really want you. It's kind of known in China that they say, in Chinese culture, and I don't know about Asian culture in general, but I know in Koreans too, but in Chinese culture, I'll say in Asian culture, a lot of the time it's East Asian culture, sorry. It's it's like code. They speak in code. And I don't know if it's because of all the a lot of the Chinese medicine, true knowledge getting put underground during the Cultural Revolution or whatever. But either way, it's this, it could just be just the culture itself, right? And how, they will, because this medicine is a part of them, right? When they say they'll say a symptom that their organ is having, that their body is going through, but they know that whoever is hearing it knows what's really underlying, right? If that makes, I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's kind of common that you sort of speak in code, you're not going to inquire too much, get too personal, because they're already knowing that what they're telling you about their body is that you're able to see what's really going on. It's they know you get it, if they just say my spleen, right? Whereas the Western version is this happened and da 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 da, and we don't really speak in code. We're sort of talking about what happened to us, right? So I think that's something to remember when you're treating various patients as well, based off of their previous knowledge and cultural background and whatnot. So the Chinese physician is also concerned with the patient's description of the exact quality of his or her pain, which I just flew 2 pages back. So yeah, basically we're just going to finish it off here. Major illness is an uninvented opportunity, because the wind is making all my pages flow everywhere. And then we're at pulse after this as well, which is going to be the next video. So just to conclude, major illness is an uninvented opportunity for self-revelation and growth. And the physician must be alert to this possibility in the current situation. So the physician cannot be afraid to ask heavy questions. Are you thinking or dealing with the possibility of death, disability, being a burden, losses, unfinished work, or relationships? These aren't things you're going to like ask your patient the first time you meet them. But I remember when my 92-year-old grandpa was in the hospital, and he was going through some stuff, and there was that moment where there was the question of whether or not they were gonna like keep him alive. And I remember holding his hand and just looking into his eyes, and I said, do you still have it in you? Like, do you want to be alive? And there was no question. He just nodded. Oh, absolutely. Like, he wasn't ready to die. He still had, but they chose to unplug him anyways, my father. So I do feel that, and I remember later on, years later, having a conversation with somebody and asking them, like, their dad was in the hospital dying, and I was on the phone with them, and I remember saying to them, like, have you asked him if he wants to stay alive or not? And he's like, oh, I would never ask that. This was just some random person I knew, and that's, I would never, right? And so that's the difference between, like, a regular person and somebody who's, like, trained and professional and a doctor, right? It's not, you can't be afraid to ask deep questions, heavy questions. And I sure as hell am not, if you know me. The responses, whether in words, emotions, or muscular postures, can reveal the character of human landscape, the deepest layers of yin and yang. And I do want to make one point on what I just said, that, like, especially with sexual stuff, that's something you do not really you can ask basic questions. Are you sexually active? When's the last time? Especially if they're coming to you with concerns around gynecology or fertility or whatever. But as you have to build a relationship with the patient before you start inquiring and giving them advice. I remember having a student in clinic, like above me, student in clinic, and I was like first year student, and I went and saw them for a treatment, and they were like, it was not like some of the things they were saying, I won't forget. They were suggesting weird things and like telling me I should do this and that. And I was like, whoa, like I remember my teacher walking into the room because I started crying because I felt like really uncomfortable around this woman. And so she was like anyways, I won't get into the details, but there's, like, that's an example, in my opinion, that was an example of somebody who had their own heart issues and were projecting them on me. And then I was also with my own, like, liver issues, probably getting defensive, and we're all just effed up in the first year at school, right? But anyways, that lady ended up turning out to be, I stayed away from her for 4 years. I think she quit school like my first year, but either way, it's like I'll be either way, it's just, if you go see somebody for the first time and you tell them, maybe you're like having anxiety or something, and they're like, oh, well, have you tried this or that? Or it's like, no, maybe not the time to give somebody like sexual advice when you first met them, right? Definitely out of scope, not your position, don't even think about it. Not your place. So the physician cannot be afraid to ask heavy questions, but we also don't want to be interrogating, especially when we have just met somebody. There's certain questions you do not ask in a first session. During the personal background part of the interview, the physician also needs to discuss the patient's preferences, expectations, and beliefs. Not only do they help reveal the energetic configuration of people, they all can be a major determinant of the physician's explanation, therapeutic strategy, and the final outcome of the patient-physician exchange. So next is touching ꜱɪജ, and we're going to go on to, which is pulse, right? So pulse diagnosis, and we're going to go into that into the next video. So you made it through. I know that was a lot, but Chinese medicine is a lot. And if you are actually serious about, doing it, I would suggest like knowing a lot of, like, I read the whole Web That Has No Weaver that I'm reading to you guys. I read that for fun. Like, before I ever wanted to be a student, I just would like YouTube videos about 5-element theory, and I didn't even know what acupuncture was. I had needle phobia. I just liked herbology, and I remember I would YouTube videos on 5-element theory and write them out in my journal, like just nerding out. And then I bought a paperback of The Web That Has No Weaver at Pages. I remember some secondhand store. And then I ended up bringing it, like, fast forward a year or two into my interview for school. And I was like, oh, I read this book. Like, is this a good book? And even though The Web That Has No Weaver is not one of the required texts to read in your schooling, like it's suggested, and he was like in the interview, oh yeah, definitely, that's a good book. And going back to it now after all the classics and stuff, it's such a gem. It's such a gem, and it's so well written. It's so full of just everything. But obviously, if you're trying to pass your exams, you can't just read The Web That Has No Weaver for many reasons, around just nomenclature and things like that. With the naming of the meridians, they just say long meridian, right? Not long meridian of Han Taiyan, right? So we have to I just think that it's just interesting looking at this now, that like this book found me in like 2011, 2010, right? And then I found school in 2013, and just do what makes you happy. Do what you love. Like, I was in school with a lot of people who really did not like the medicine. I'm going to be real with you. And some of them are practicing. I've seen some of them practicing in the clinic to this day. And blatantly in school told me, like, I wish that I loved this as much as you do. People would say that to me. Like, I wish I loved the medicine as much as you do. And I couldn't believe they were like gonna go and get their licenses if they didn't love it, So just keep that in mind, right? That's why I say it's so important to not just see anybody, right? Like, find somebody who resonates with you, who like connects with you, who you like. Yeah, okay, they might be really good at sticking needles in, but when's the last, I can guarantee that a lot of them have I can guarantee that a lot of acupuncturists have never read this book. So I just want to just state that, there's people out there that do things for a job to pay the bills, and then there's people out there who actually really genuinely care about what they're doing and want to help you, right? And some people, that their intentions might be really good, that they just want to help you, but they just want to stick needles in you, and that's all they care about. And this stuff, the real deep wisdom, the Taoism. I mean, no one I was in school with ever but read this, was even thought about reading the sayings of Lizi. That was a teacher who gave me that book. It's the philosophy, the Taoism, the actual theory was stripped of Chinese medicine. The books were rewritten after the Cultural Revolution, so there's no actual Taoism left in the medicine. All the gems were really taken out. And so I just feel like it's our job as modern students, practitioners, whatever you may be, or just people interested, to actually read between the lines, dig deeper, look into the fabrics of creation of these stories and of these parables, and dig deep, the story from the sayings of Lizi that's on my channel about the man walking down the road and the guy, with his disciple, and then he picks up a skull on the ground and goes, is he alive or am I dead? And he's like, well, if he's alive, then I'm dead, and if I'm alive, then he's dead. I mean, there's just there's a lot, and we tend to just like see somebody and it's all physical and it's like, oh, okay, like you have a common cold, I'm gonna put in these needles, have a nice day, see you next week. Like, no, like let's bring back the art, which is what Ted Kavchuk is trying to write about from The Web That Has No Weaver. Like, bring back the art. Don't be afraid to be the art. In fact, don't even in my opinion, don't even go and put on a white coat and get your license until you have become the art. I straight up feel that way. And I don't care if I get hate in the comments from that. Do as you will. That's the truth, right? Nobody should be out there treating other people who are actually sick if they have not healed their soul first. I don't want anybody touching my body or touching me in a medical way that hasn't worked on their spirit and their soul. Hell no. And on that note, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. And I'm obviously a little yang in nature today, as you may think. So I'm going to go practice some Yin meditation and do my readings and have some, also ground myself, eat some like good food, warm food, nice grounding, energetically good food, healthy. And yeah, I'm going to make the video. And I think, lastly, I just want to mention, this isn't a shot at anybody who goes and becomes an acupuncturist and stuff like that. All the power to you. It's helped me greatly in my life. But I do believe there was a point in school where I was like, no, I didn't want students needling me anymore. I don't want, yes, in order to learn, but eventually when you're practicing in clinic, you find your one friend who needles you, you like their energy type deal, and vice versa. So, and it's about connection, right? And so the same should be applied in your day-to-day life. Whether you're going to see a Western doctor, a naturopath, I think you should definitely, if you have a real ailment, what the advice I give to anybody in my personal life that's going through some sort of real medical disharmony or issue, then I say, hey, go, get your blood work done, go get your Western doctor diagnosis, but then also, if you can afford it, go see a naturopath and a TCMP. And then you use the three together and be okay, take what you got from the Western medicine doctor, take what you got from the naturopath, and take what you got from the TCMP. Use them in unison, because the way our system is designed, it doesn't yes, that you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to have multiple doctors that can work together and stuff, but ultimately they're kind of undermining each other at the same time, right? They say they respect each other, but I do believe take control of your own health is what I'm trying to say. If something's really bothering you and going on for a long period of time, or not even, just go seek out multiple, just the same way, if you're going to buy a house or a car, you don't just go and get the first car or the first house you look at. Maybe you do. But usually you look around a little bit, right? And then you find what works with you, for you, and what actually is helping you. And then you stick to that, right? And also acupuncture and Chinese medicine, it shouldn't be it's not something you do forever, right? It's something you would do to get better. You're not just going all the time it's great to do it as general maintenance, but also, once the treatment is complete and the treatment plan is complete, then, you don't need to treat the patient, right? Unless they actually need to be treated, right? So there's that as well. I wanted to say, because sometimes even in my personal life, I'll be oh, I want to film and I need to put a bunch of needles in, right? But then if I'm feeling good that day already, and I'm already feeling great, I'm kind of maybe I'll just wait till tomorrow to film. And then lo and behold, tomorrow I wake up, slept on my neck weird, and perfect day to needle, right? But kind of what I'm saying is just when you're already feeling good, you don't need to go and start treating things that don't need necessarily, just feel good, you know, just enjoy your day. On that note, enjoy your day. And please do subscribe. I know I say it in all my videos, but in February, they are going to be changing the requirements in order to be eligible to earn. So I really do, it would mean a lot if you subscribed and just listen to a couple videos so that I can get the eligible hours in. I'm almost there, and every little, you know, minute you watch counts, and every subscription counts. And it's really like, I'll be really honest with you guys, like I'm in the process of switching my careers, right? Like I have managed 2 websites for the last 7 years, and on and off, like when I wasn't in school, that's what I was doing. And I'm at the point in my life where I think like I would really like to do more of this and do more teaching. And the more I can invest in, like the more subscribers I have, the more views that I have, the more I can invest in posting more videos here for you guys, as opposed to doing what I've been doing. So that's another aspect of it. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Stay tuned for, I have it written down here. I'm going to be doing Pulse video next, as well as Zong Fu from Cam and Giovanni's Foundations. And then we're going to draw out on the whiteboard the special points chart for your exams. 2 charts, actually, the one with the special points, and then the one to memorize the 5 element points. And then we're going to go over the chapter of the art of Chinese medicine as an art from the Web That Has No Weaver. And those will all be posted by Friday. So stay tuned, check back, subscribe so that you get the latest, newest videos already presented to you in your feed without having to seek them out. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace and love always.